held today on October 13th, 7 p.m. Before we get into this, I'm going to pass it over to our city attorney to talk through a recent House bill that was passed today and the Supreme Court decision that was in relation to virtual meetings. Mr. Helmier?
Sure. So I'll deal with the Supreme Court decision first. The Supreme Court came out with a couple of different opinions, both of which actually gave immediate effect to its prior decision, holding that the governor did not have authority to enact the executive orders under the current law. The bigger question then becomes some of the remedial provisions that were included in those executive orders, and the legislature dealt with one of those today under the Open Meetings Act. And so the Senate Bill 1108 passed the Senate and then was considered in the House today. The House had a substitute bill. There are a couple wording changes, but that went to Ways and Means, unanimously recommended it, and the House voted in favor of that. So I think that we are likely to see that bill enacted into law, which will allow the public bodies to continue to meet virtually through the end of the year. There were a couple of amendments that were proposed to extend that, but as of right now, it would extend through December 31st of this year for any reason, and then all of next year, but there are certain qualifications then into next year, one of which would be if there is a local state of emergency that required you to meet virtually or electronically. So at this time, I don't think there's any reason for the city council to change the manner in which it is holding meetings. That legislation also authorizes all of the meetings that you've had since April 30th as well. So it's got both a retroactive effect and a prospective effect when that is adopted and finally becomes law, which I anticipate will be shortly.
Yeah, and I got off the phone with the governor's office earlier today, and they informed me that they expect to have that bill signed very, very quickly here. But Mr. Helmier, what does that mean for today's meeting?
So there are a couple different things. One is there are certainly differences of opinions with respect to virtual meetings. I tend to believe, although I will admit it's not shared by everybody, that there's nothing in the Open Meetings Act that precludes you from meeting electronically the way we have been meeting. Others read the Open Meetings Act to require a physical place where a quorum of the board must convene. But the Open Meetings Act isn't necessarily drafted in such a narrow manner. It defines a meeting in which a quorum of the board is convened, but whether that means a physical place or a place such as Zoom or on the internet for purposes of conducting a public meeting remains unclear, at least as I read the Open Meetings Act. And I think the reasoning behind the interpretation that some have taken sort of is not supportable, in as much as there are people out there that would argue that you have to meet as a quorum in a physical place. That is, you have to gather as a quorum, say at City Hall, but that you could exclude the public from that in-person physical presence at City Hall. So imagine, if you will, you have a quorum of the City Council at City Hall meeting, and then you allow the public only to attend by, say, telephone conference. There are multiple people and entities that have argued that. But when you really look at the reasoning behind it, it really doesn't make too much sense. I would argue that you can see all of the members of the City Council on this meeting. There is a quorum present. It's open, it's transparent, and allows two-way transmission between the public and the City Council. Whereas if you advocate for the other, members of the public may not be able to see council members. The second thing is, and there are two other public policy points, I would argue, and one was noted at the House meeting today, where public participation by video meetings is actually increased and not decreased. That is, it's more accessible to the public. And finally, I would argue that people who attend meetings, whether it be council members or members of the public, should not have to choose between their safety and well-being in attending a meeting and participating in local government. And it puts the city in an untenable position because we never know how many members of the public may show up. So you're in a position of having to either possibly violate MDHH's order restricting the number of people attending the meeting, or the Open Meetings Act by turning away the public from meetings that would have otherwise been open to the public, but for the restrictions in those orders. So on balance, I think that, and I think the legislature has recognized this as well, public participation is enhanced by these meetings. These meetings certainly show and evidence a quorum of the board. They are recorded. They're two-way transmissions so the public can participate. And so I would recommend that you move forward as you have been.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. We have one action item, I believe, today that might be passed. Are we at risk of passing that sort of item right now as a full body meeting virtually? And if we are, and if that were to call into question, what would be our next step going forward?
So if it was called into question, there's a short timeline to invalidate decisions made at meetings, either 60 or 30 days, depending on the nature of it. Here, if we're discussing the ordinance at issue, then it's a 60-day statute of limitations. But by then, I would suggest that the legislature likely will be wrapped up. The governor will likely have signed the bill, and it's going to authorize all these meetings anyways. Even if it didn't, you can reenact that meeting to do it over again. And so you always have that ability under the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, thank you. Any other council members have questions on that item? I just wanted to get out of the way before we conducted the rest of this meeting. Great, seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll? Thank you, Mr. Howard.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Babcock,
Present.
Councilmember Bacon,
Present.
Councilmember